I was the maid who pulled something alive out of a millionaire's son's ear. 10 years of silence, then he whispered my name. Be honest with me. Is that a miracle or a mistake, you handcuff? They called it the Thompson Mansion, but it never felt like a home, more like a museum of quiet, where the air conditioning hummed at a rich, polite volume, and everyone walked like their shoes were apologizing. Marble that echoed chandeliers that glittered like they charged rent for every sparkle, and rules about noise you could feel before anyone said a word. My name is Grace. I wore the uniform I washed by hand. I kept a little silver pin for loose hems, and I carried a promise I made over my brother Daniel when we were kids. He lost his hearing after a fever we could not afford to treat. The hospital turned us away with words that still sting, and one afternoon the world kept talking while he slipped away in the kind of silence you never outrun. Since then, a voice in me would not shut up, and it said, if you ever meet another child drowning in that quiet, you look, you listen, you do not look away. Caleb Thompson owned that mansion, and just about everything inside it, including how the staff breathed. He had the haircut of a man who wins arguments before they start the watch, that says time is something that belongs to him, not the other way around. But if you watched close when he thought no one was looking, you saw it, that thin, raw edge behind the eyes, the part that kept him awake when the planes stopped and the boardrooms emptied, the father part. His boy Ethan was born deaf. 10 years of specialists' flights, promises, brochures with smiling children, a list of donations long enough to wrap the city twice, and every night he still came home to the same quiet that made him grind his teeth. Money can move mountains, but it cannot dictate a heartbeat, and it cannot bribe a miracle. I met Ethan my first week. He didn't crash toy cars, he arranged them in straight lines, soft as a breath, like the world might break if he pressed too hard. He studied mouths the way some folks study the sky for weather, always searching. I started leaving small things, because gifts don't need sound to land. You know what I mean? A paper bird folded from a receipt. I didn't need the only good chocolate out of my lunch. A little note with a smiley sun, because why not? At first, nothing like tossing pebbles into a lake at midnight and waiting for ripples you can't see. Then one morning the chocolate was gone and my paper bird sat parked in his neat line of cars. And when we caught each other in the window glass, he lifted his hand and waved, serious and slow, like a judge making a ruling. I dropped a cup later that day, flinched, and he laughed without sound. Body-shaking eyes crinkled and the whole room warmed 2 degrees. Not everyone loved that. The head butler believed in borders. He told me, eyes straight, you're here to clean, not to bond. I nodded because rent is rude and on time, but a nod is not an oath. Loneliness perched behind Ethan's eyes like a bird that refused to fly, and once you see it, you can't teach yourself to unsee. One morning in the garden, he scratched his ear with that heavy, focused look kids get when something hurts, in a way grown-ups can't name for them. I knelt and signed, "Are you okay?" He shook his head. I tilted his face toward the sun and leaned in, and I saw a glisten deep in the curve of his ear, something dark where there should be nothing at all, and my stomach did that elevator drop you can't stop. It moved. I didn't touch him, I just signed, "Let's tell your father, okay." He flinched, hands trembling, and signed back. No doctors, then again. They hurt me. That kind of fear doesn't lie, it lives in the bones. If it were you, what would you have done? Play it safe and look away, or take a risk on the truth right in front of you? I tried to follow the rules first. That afternoon I moved close to check again, and the playroom door creaked. Caleb stood there with a suit that fit like a verdict. "What are you doing?" not a question. I hid the little silver pin I had pulled from my hem, told him the boy was in pain, I was trying to help. "You're not a doctor," he said, and what he meant was, "I cannot survive another promise that breaks me." His voice thinned at the end, in a way that told on him so. I stepped back, but the picture of that moving shadow inside Ethan's ear burned behind my eyes and would not go. Night is when a house tells on itself. When the staff finally slept, and the fountains outside whispered to the stars. I walked the hall barefoot, heartbeat loud in my own ears. Ethan sat up in bed with his hands pressed to his ear. Small shoulders braced like a wave was coming, and he knew it. I signed, "It hurts." He nodded, eyes wet, brave like some kids are when the ocean in them is bigger than fear. The lamplight threw a soft circle, and when I leaned close, there it was again, that wrong glisten, where only skin should be. I whispered, "I will be gentle." I held the pin cleaned and small, and my hand shook, and I said, "Lord, guide me, because sometimes prayer is permission to act." I touched the edge, felt something soft and sticky, hooked, pulled, slow breath, held nothing. Then all at once, a little black wet thing slid into my palm and moved. Hold on. Yes, it moved. My skin screamed. Ethan's eyes flew wide. He touched his ear, then his throat, like he was checking if his insides had changed. And then he opened his mouth, and sound came out rough and broken and real, and my whole body went still because he said my name. Grace. I dropped the pin and laughed and cried, at the same time asked, "Can you hear me?" And he flinched at the ticking clock because the world was suddenly full of noise, and he pointed at the window where the wind pushed the curtain and asked sound. I nodded, and the room felt new, like someone had peeled plastic off it. That was the exact second the butler stepped into the doorway, eyes like plates. He shouted for Mr. Thompson. Ethan flinched at the volume, and I pulled him close, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay. This is all brand new." Caleb came fast, eyes jumping from me to his son, and his son looked up and said, "Dad." The room stopped breathing. For a decade, that word had been an empty cup, and now it was overflowing. Caleb took one step like he didn't trust his own legs. Then the house rules slammed back into place, and he barked, "What did you do?" "What did you put in him?" And security flooded the hall, big hands on small wrists. And the last thing I heard while they dragged me away was Ethan screaming my name with a voice he just learned to use. Pattern interrupt. Yeah, that happened. The ambulance painted the driveway in red and blue while the mansion stood pretending it didn't care. At the hospital, everything smelled like bleach and mystery. Nurses moved like they were born on wheels, doctors rehearsed comfort in the mirror, and Caleb stood behind glass with his jaw clenched so tight you could hear it if you knew what quiet really sounds like. They said words like temporary and irritation and foreign substance. They said, "We've never seen anything like it." They taped a soft bandage near Ethan's ear, and he kept trying to say two names, Dad and Grace, little voice trembling, the way a newborn deer stands. Me. I sat in a small room down the hall with cuffs on my wrists and fear in my mouth. A nurse with a kind face brought me water she wasn't supposed to bring and whispered, "He's okay so far." I thanked her with my eyes because that felt safer. If it were you, would you have kept your head down and prayed for a lawyer? Or would you have started yelling for someone to call the truth by its name? I did both. Then came the twist that flipped the whole world over. Caleb was handed a folder. He flipped through pages the way rich men do when they're looking for a number that explains a pain, and then he stopped. One line turned his face to chalk. Maintain diagnosis for continued funding approval. Thompson account remains active. No, you're not mishearing me. Keep the boy deaf. Keep the money moving. Keep the donors nodding. He shut the folder like it bit him, and he didn't explode. He went quiet in that way men sometimes do, right before they end something that never should have started. He walked to his son, touched his cheek, and asked someone to bring me up, voice stuck on the word, please. They unlocked me and I stepped into Ethan's room and he beamed, said Grace, like the sun saying my name. Caleb stood like a man shaking hands with the better version of himself. He said, I am sorry, I should have listened, and I said, you were scared. You're a father. I get it, and it wasn't a speech. It was two people finally telling the truth without trying to save face. He turned to the doctor and said, all these years, and no one checked like that, not once, and the doctor dropped his eyes and said he was sorry, so quietly even the walls didn't believe him. Caleb looked back at me and said, you saw what nobody else did because you actually looked. I told him I did it because I couldn't watch him suffer one more minute. He nodded, and then he did something nobody saw coming. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. He called a press conference in the hospital basement. Reporters multiplied like somebody shook a tree, full of cameras, lights popped, microphones reached the room, felt hot with attention. Caleb stepped up to the mic with that CEO posture. Only this time his voice carried something different, a steady that comes from finally choosing the right hill. He said, for 10 years I was told my son would never hear. I paid for the best names on doors, the best machines, the best promises, and a maid in my home did what the experts could not. She gave my son his sound. You could feel the word Maid land like a challenge. He lifted the folder and said, what we uncovered is worse than I imagined. My son's condition was maintained for profit. He was kept in silence so the funds would keep coming. The room shifted from skeptical to stunned. Caleb said, I helped build a world that listens when money speaks. From today, that changes. I'm starting a foundation for free pediatric hearing care. No bills, no favors, no waiting rooms that steal childhoods. And the first person I'm hiring to lead community outreach is Grace. Me. I stood in the back with my cheap shoes and my hands shaking and tried not to cry in front of cameras because tears on TV turn into someone else's ad copy. Do you think that's fair? A maid from the laundry room asked to help run a mission born from the ashes of a lie? Or is that exactly how justice should sound? Back at the mansion, the air changed. People spoke at normal volume, and nobody got in trouble for laughing. The fountain outside sounded less like a stranger and more like a heartbeat. Ethan ran across the marble like it had been waiting for his footsteps the whole time. He said new words carefully, like he was unwrapping gifts, birdwater, cookie whiskers, when he touched his father's cheek and giggled. I still worked because that's who I am, only now. I wasn't listed as help, I was trusted staff family. The butler's tone thawed a few degrees, and he even brought me tea once, which I accepted like a peace treaty between countries that do not speak the same language. At night, we sat in the garden papers for the foundation spread across the table like blueprints for a new city. I taught Ethan new sounds, slowed everything down to honor the truth that the world is loud, and patience is love spelled with more letters. Caleb signed documents that would shift the weight of a system he helped build. Then he looked up to watch his son mangle the word apple and beam like that was the most important deal he had ever closed. You know that look when someone hears a sound they didn't know was missing? Yeah, that one. One evening, the sky went that wild orange that makes even bad days look forgivable. And Ethan said, "Can I say something?" Caleb smiled and said, "Always." Ethan pointed at me and said, "She's my hero." I covered my face because joy is bright, and I am still getting used to it. Caleb said, "She's mine too," and he didn't stage it. He just said it like a truth that finally found a home. Later I passed the study and found him at the window listening to the fountain, not just hearing it, listening. He said, "You're still awake." I said, "Could ask you the same." He said, "I'm thinking about how small things change everything." I said, "Like a pin, like a choice, like a word." He nodded and thanked me not as a boss thanks staff, but as a father thanks the stranger who pulled his child off the road before the bus came. "You didn't just give my son hearing, you gave me mine." I told him that sometimes we all just need someone to listen. Now let's be real for a second, because the internet is full of people who want to argue, and sometimes they're right. Was it reckless to use a pin, even clean, even careful? Maybe. I am not a doctor. I am a woman who looked at a child shaking in pain, and a decade of experts who missed what was right there because the system that feeds them is noisy in the wrong places. Do you think that's fair, that papers can carry sentences like maintain diagnosis for continued funding approval, while a boy misses the sound of his own father's breath? Or was I wrong and lucky in equal measure? Tell me, if it were you, would you have waited for permission in a house where permission had a price, or would you have taken the risk and lived with whatever came next? The foundation launched lines formed, parents cried in that quiet way, tired people cry. We hired nurses who believe competence and kindness are not enemies. We drove vans into neighborhoods the billboards never show. We fitted tiny ears with tiny instruments and watched faces blossom, and some nights I went home with my cheeks sore from smiling. But let's not pretend the board members from that hospital all disappeared. Some stepped down like they were doing charity, some found lawyers, some gave statements with smile lines that didn't move, and some called Caleb with words like rotate donations and be reasonable, and there are processes. He said no. He said reasonable is how this stayed broken. The fallout isn't over, and maybe that's how it should be. Good trouble, the kind that rattles doors and wakes the neighbors. I still keep the silver pin. I won't make it. A necklace won't frame it. I keep it in a little tin where I store spare buttons and a photo of Daniel that always makes me pause. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of who I am when it matters. Ethan keeps my paper birds in a box and reads their names like he's blessing them. And the house that used to punish sound now measures life by it. Dishes clink, a radio hums in the kitchen, the fountain laughs. A boy who once lived behind glass says, "Good night, Dad," and a man who once worshipped silence closes his eyes and prays a thank you. He does not post online. So I want to ask you a few things, not to stir the pot, just to see what rises. When a system profits from suffering, what does justice look like? Is an apology enough? Is a resignation enough? Or should people who signed those papers meet a courtroom that listens harder than their accountants? Should a maid be trusted when doctors don't? Or did I gamble with a child's body and get grace I didn't deserve? Can money learn how to listen? Or does it just train itself to hear new words for the same old silence? Do you think that's fair? If it were you, what would you have done? If this story hit something tender or angry in you, talk to me. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in that lamplight, with a hurting kid and a pin in your hand. Tell me if Caleb did the right thing dragging it into daylight instead of settling it behind closed doors. Share your own moment when you were the only one who saw what didn't belong, and you pulled anyway. And if you want more stories told plain and honest with all the mess and all the mercy, you know what to do. Like the video, subscribe, turn on the bell so you don't miss the next one, and tell me where you're watching from. I'll be in the comments listening, because sometimes the smallest voice is the one that changes everything.